I'm very delighted to be here. I appreciate how late it is, so I hope you've got your beer cracked out or whatever you need to work with this. I'm here to talk to you about navigating the messy middle using you as a compass. The visual that you see now in front of you is an example of what I call zooming out, which those of you who are either in startups or who are actively working with Agile implementations we'll get from time to time really honed in on something specific, and zooming out is a way to see where things are going. So this is an aerial of water, and it illustrates basically how social emotions can cut through rigid and tough objects like land masses. So that's the idea there. Let me just see if I can get this thing to progress. There we go. So the bridge that Agile is taking, and by the way, here I'm looking at Agile as a mindset, not as the method. And that there's a reason for that, because as a mindset, it scales to the entire organization, and it really helps organizations move into a higher level of capacity for working with complex living conditions, the kind of conditions that we see today. So, you know, the old was built on value extraction. It was built on the assumption that everything ran mechanically. People were optional. We saw some of those decisions in early days of COVID when people say, yeah, we really value people, until a crisis hits, and then they fired them. And obviously they didn't grasp that companies are run by people, not by machines. So they tend to be built on linear thinking, meaning it's you know, if we process plus, you know, or sorry, input plus process is output, and in that output is a lot of waste. Whereas in the newly version, the version that's emerging now, and has for some companies been around for a long, long time, we're seeing something that's more circular. That's where the concept of the circular economy, regenerative. There's a whole bunch of ways of talking about it. Both run on networks, whether or not people recognize it. And as you well know, if you're in a traditional company, they value highly predictability and certainty, which of course in the world we're in we are not in that at all. We are in something that is quite uncertain. It's quite unclear about what will happen next, which option or which direction is the best one. Those are all part of what we face today. So it changes how we come at it, how we think about things, and how we approach it. I contacted Andras Vishak, who is org mapper, because I wanted to be able to illustrate for you what the difference in assumptions are. Org mapper is it's software tech out of Hungary, I think. Anyway, close to you all, let's put it that way. And he gave me this slide, which is really their mech and their tool sort of says, you know, on the left-hand side, we've got, here's what we think we know. It's all structured, looks lovely, very organized. But when you go to implement anything, it's quite messy. It's based on communication. It's based on who knows who. It's based on knowing who has the trust of people. And where there is, you know, the power sits. So what you want to know then in any organizational setting is that when organizations run on networks, you want to know what those networks are. You want to be able to make those decisions by zooming out and taking a look. So that's essentially what their software does. I've been a big fan of it for years, but I really wanted to make sure that you knew you had something close to home to be able to work with when you're monitoring and overseeing an Agile implementation. This is, now I know most of you are familiar with Dave Snowden's work, but I wanted to bring it out because the model has in each of the 4 quadrants, i.e. no matter what condition you're in, there's one word that threads through it all, and that is the word sense. Strangely enough, it's the word that we least use, and yet we use it automatically, but we least use it more intentionally and more consciously, if I can say it that way. So what that means then is that we've got a huge opportunity to develop that capacity, particularly using the conditions that we're in right now with a pandemic, which basically has the same characteristics as climate change does, except it's in our face. So we have to pay attention to it. Sensing has been around a long time. David Packard, this came from a colleague of mine who I was talking to, and she was telling me that she, you know, David Packard was being asked, you know, how How did he know when the HP way was working? And he said, I can't, but I can sense when it isn't. Now, he probably said, I can't, but I can tell when it isn't. But he's referencing that capacity to sense more deeply. Now we're getting into the deeper part of your personal capacity to navigate really unpredictable conditions of, not knowing what will happen. We're gonna dial back to the ancient Polynesian navigator days. I've done a podcast on this with ethnobotanist Wade Davis, in case you want to learn more about this. He wrote a book called The Wayfinders, which is really, how did the people in those periods of time navigate 4,000 kilometers across open ocean without any instruments whatsoever? They just went out there, and you had highly trained people who committed from an early age, like baby, to become capable of detecting subtle shifts, for one. For two, being able to absorb multiple streams of data all at once and not get overwhelmed. And today I hear a lot of people saying, oh, we're feeling so overwhelmed and I just don't know. Well, it's because there's a lot of reliance on the mental faculties to process these multiple streams of data. And it's just not up for the task. It's too much. So this is where you use the rest of your capacity. And some of you may actually know that you're sensitive. And if you are, perfect, because now you get to train for that and use it as an ally instead of as what it can sometimes be, which is not helpful. So this is the context, just to give you an idea of what the commitment is to training yourself. At 14, this Polynesian man tied his, okay, man, think of the most tenderest part of your body that you protect very carefully when playing sports. That's the part he tied to the rigging, so he could better sense the movement of the canoe through the water. That's how the level of commitment. So it's a very counter logical kind of an approach, but it's one that works extremely well when you're working with changing data, moving conditions, all the time. Now it's relevant because here we are in 2020, and we have this is work done by Electrica Live, research work done by Dr. Theo Dawson. You can go to see her stuff. A lot of stuff of hers is on Medium. The green line represents the complexity embedded in senior management roles. Just going to see if I can move this, my bar. I don't know what's going on for you, but I've got this big thing in the way. Okay, so this big green bar here is one that illustrates the complexity of the role. And this is the lower bar is the one that illustrates how capable people are of meeting it. So again, things like COVID, pandemics, anytime you're dealing with the unpredictable, the unfamiliar, new territory, startups are in that most of the time in the early days, you've got a chance to really up the level of your skill set and your mindset to meet that complexity. So wonderful opportunity to increase capacity, both personally and organizationally, and of course, team as well in between. The opportunity, using that opportunity means taking advantage of the gap, which I'll show you in a second, but the gap between what skills do I have now, how am I thinking about things now, and what's the size of the challenge I have in front of me. Flow follows focus. That's Stephen Kotler from the Flow Genome, or sorry, the Flow Research Collective. So in other words, it's training your focus to be very aware of what you're paying attention to. And I'll give you some principles on to follow, practically follow in your work toward the end here. So there is a stretch zone that, in other words, if you get too far out into the holy moly land, in the sense of it's being unpredictable, it's uncertain, and I have really, then you kind of pull back a little, recenter, reground yourself. These are skills I'll be covering off in episode 2 of a program we've got coming up with the Care4 Live platform out of Italy in Europe, coming up in the next week and in November. So it's just to say you've got a chance here to play with this and really make it work for you. This is the picture, in case you're wondering what this picture is. It's obviously a digital picture, but it is one of a diver who is riding an underwater current and riding the wave underneath. So he's doing absolutely nothing. And when you get into that zone, it's a lovely place to be, because it means that it's very hard to get knocked off your center. Visually, this is what it means, working toward being very comfortable and at ease with uncertainty, and feeling at the same time a sense of control. So it's not, you don't lose control at all. You keep it, but it's inside yourself. You're not claiming control over your environment. You're claiming control over your emotions, over your reactions, and using that to build your own, increase your capacity. Before I get into the skills, which I'm going to do we have any questions, the clarification, Tomasz?
Trying to unmute. I don't see any so far, so either everything is clear or they don't know how to ask the question.
Okay, well, we'll play with it at the end and see what we've got. I'm giving you some concepts here, and what I'm hoping for is that you'll bring forward situations that you would want to see them applied, because then we can talk about that. So
yeah, otherwise we'll just ask you to create your canoe at the end of this session and try this by yourself, right?
Yeah, well, you can apply it to personal life or organizational life. There's lots of opportunities in today. So yeah, thank you. So basically then we've got 3 categories that I'm going to cover today. Sensing, which is deep, deep, deep sensing. It's not surface level. Shifting perception, getting very fluid at working with diverse points of view, diverse perspectives. Being present, which is about training your focus so that you're focused on what you want, as opposed to getting pulled in multiple directions by incoming information that wants you to be over here and over here and over there. It is keeping your entire energy focused on what you want. It's obviously not a particularly static situation. You're always adjusting, but at least you're aware of what you're doing, what your compass is. Oops. Okay. Whoops. Oh, nuts. I don't know how to go back. Okay. Oh, there we go. Yes. So when I go into an organization and I'm listening for the deep dynamics, and literally I'm listening for, it's a very profound deep listening. It's also sensory. So it's those 2 faculties combined together. I am listening for what's going on underneath the surface. What's the undertow at the level of deep dynamics? And that will be shown to me by where people are focusing their attention, how they're interacting with each other. Is there conflict? Is there tension? Is it being used to develop capacity, or is it being used to avoid or resolve instead of actually putting into work for you in terms of developing better solutions? So complexity is best handled by working with adversity, and we often forget that. Metrics have a way, the wrong metrics in particular, have a way of torquing behavior, driving it actually. And sometimes that's what you're seeing when you're implementing an Agile implementation, or you are getting your startup going, for example, and you are trying to figure out just what do I pay attention to. At some point you zoom out to take a look at what I am paying attention to and whether that's going the way where I want it to go. So there's always an undertow beneath the surface. Things look really rosy on the top, but when you sense deeper, to watch for the currents, what I call the currents of social emotional pattern, what's going on for people, that's where you get real insights into pace, and do we speed things up? Do we slow things down? Do we help people over here because they're struggling? Is there some coaching, mentoring that needs to go on? And if so, what area does it need to be in? Do we have groups that are pretending to know what they're doing, like they've learned the Agile vocabulary, for example, but don't have a clue what it means? So they've taken the Agile words and put it on old practices to make it look like it's Agile. And the term that I think Steve Denning and probably other people call it fake Agile. It's sort of, got the vocabulary, but don't necessarily have an understanding of what it actually means, and nor do we embed that in our behavior. So this is a real field for strong authenticity, strong integrity, and therefore clear and less stressful implementation, which is kind of helpful, I think, especially now. Okay, so what I want to do now is a deeper dive into each of those skill sets and sensing. And as I'm going through this, what I would appreciate you doing is just identifying for yourself, and there's 3 areas I'm covering, just pull out things as I'm going through them that you can say, yeah, I need to work on that. Where these skills and concepts apply to your reality, which I can't make up. So there's no, it cuts across contexts, in the trans context, the underlying currents of thinking. Now, they will show up. This example I have is an interview I did in probably 2009 with the former Ford Navigator design team, and they were told to go forth and come up with a new model, but the organizational belief structure was don't do anything different. So come up with something new, but don't do anything different. And so he got called in and just got berated for breaking some rules. And that's where you see things collide, because the metrics and the mindset is based on stability, predictability, conform, as opposed to actually doing things creatively. And so this is how this stuff will show up. Just take notes on it. Notice how the formal systems drive informal interactions. Is it toward or away from what you're trying to achieve? And by formal systems, it's what are the systems in place that reward personal, individual behavior and performance over team? In other words, look at the metrics a fair amount. Look at the human resource systems and see how, if they're called human resources in the first place, there's going to be a question mark around the focus. So again, you're always looking for how do these things drive the interaction. Where is energy being directed? That tells you where the focus is at a meta level, at a sub level. So where is energy going? What is the quality of interaction? Are people trusting each other? Is that, going back to that slide with Andras and the org mapper, is it clear where the trust power dynamics are and whether they're on balance with each other, whether they're supporting what you're trying to do or not? The principle that you use, and there's always a principle for each of this one's a universal principle, which means you can apply it anywhere. You can apply it to your life, and you can apply it to how you navigate COVID. You can apply it to how you navigate surprise events in your life. Where am I putting my attention? Because that's where my energy is going. And if I feel depleted, I've been putting my attention in a place that is not doing my health any good. So you've got complete control over that all the time. And you also have the capacity to observe and see where it's going in an organizational level. So the application of this is, I do a lot of work and I have an enormous amount of fun with stuck projects, things that process hasn't fixed, or because they're always just tinkering with the top level instead of dealing with the bottom level. So you can apply this sensing capacity to understanding what's going on just, inside stuck projects, overseeing the entire transformation. So either specific or wider in terms of how are people doing, do they feel safe enough to try something new, where are they at, and identifying bottlenecks. So it's a deep listening capacity. The next one, oh yes, I want you to see this. This is an example of what I'm talking about. Here we go, hopefully. Okay, so that's an example of being present. So I live on the west coast of Canada, and we have whales. Those were humpback whales feeding. And this guy was just kayaking along when all of a sudden, poof, they showed up from underneath the surface feeding, but he had no way of knowing what was under. The more you develop your sensing capacity and being present is the next step in this, the easier it will be to detect what's going to show up like that. And even when it does, like it did for him, he didn't freak out. He didn't get angry. He didn't get scared. He was thrilled. And that's the mental space you want to be in. That's the emotional space you want to be in when things show up in your transformation, in your implementation, because it's there for learning purposes. It's there to work with. And it's a very exciting moment at any time. So it might not be exciting stuff coming up. It might be like, ugh, but it's still an opportunity to work with it. So yeah, so basically in terms of being present, that's being, combining focus, here with all of who you are and what you bring. So moving from working strictly with the intellect to bringing more balanced focus to seeing what emerges and work with that. So it's very heart centered because that's what directs your brain anyway. That's in Decision Making for Dummies. That information, that science is in there. It applies to one-on-one communication. In other words, you can use it at home quite effectively. Staying out of fear and ambiguity in situations where you really don't have a clue what's going to happen next. It helps you stay out of fear instead of thinking about where things were, like we've been seeing a claw back to the past. Being present means, no, I'm here. Let's work with that. And projecting into the future is worry. That's not going to help anybody at this point. So you're really just observing what emerges so you can address those gaps in development, and just work with shows up in any form. The skill sets then are training your focus, observing patterns, and working with sensory intake that you're already getting anyhow, and you're just making it for real. You're making it useful to you. Principle, again, a universal principle. Pay attention to what has heart and meaning in yourself, in your team, in your organization. That's core. So this is where principle, where focus gets tied to purpose. And the skill set here is shifting perspective. So I know this is probably a bit gross for some people, but this is the eye of a fly, and each of those dots are cameras, individual cameras with their capacity to adapt to light conditions. And I don't know how many of you have ever tried to smack a fly, but it's not easy unless you drug them or something or chill them. But it's because these eyes are all working together to create one visual. So that could be a metaphor for a whole lot of things, everything from diversity, different perspectives coming together to see the whole picture. It could be the metaphor for being able to fluidly move from an agile perspective worldview to a management worldview and back in. So there's lots of space in there to play with that one.
Hey, we have a question.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna start with, we have two questions. So the first one is, does it mean we should be constantly thinking about every possible creature that can surprise us?
Nope. Because then your focus is on thinking about every possible, you're thinking about you're thinking about what if as a risk. And that focus is probably, I think what you want to be doing is just watching, observing when something shows up like it does, then you're observing your reaction and controlling that reaction to it.
Awesome. So the second question is, so when you're talking about being present, are you referring to mindfulness? Do you have any tips to those with no experience in it?
Well, yes, no, mindfulness is now the term we're using. It's a way of self-regulating your focus and your emotions. I learned this skill back before mindfulness was around or popular. So it is, if you are being present, if you're sitting across from your partner, for example, and or one of your, especially teenage kids who get really lost in this, but if you're getting across from your kid and you're listening to them, but your mind is on your work or the car, your mind is not there, you're not present. You're not in the moment with them. And that's what that refers to. That's at the most fundamental, practical level from a communication standpoint. Where are you? You know, are you there with them? Are you taking them in? Are you listening to what they have to say? Because if you're not fully present, then you're sending out a completely different message. So that's your way of navigating. Organizationally, you're listening for, you're going to be pulled in multiple directions, but there are times you're just going to want to stop and say, what are we focused on? What are we aiming for? And then pull back the focus to direct it. So you're being present is it's sort of a data incoming spot to be in, but it's also a place where you're sending out, I am there fully 100%. So it's a leadership skill. Hope that helps.
Okay, and yeah, I'm hoping to get an answer if this helps soon. Now, I have one more question, which is for being present, you need to understand your emotions and know how to name feelings. Can you suggest some techniques like NVC could be the right way?
Well, if you're starting at ground zero with that, there's plenty of emotional IQ inventories that you can find online and work with that. I think the big thing that I've observed is noticing first of all, the context I'm in. Does that bring up certain emotions? Are there certain triggers, what we call triggers, you know, something that brings up something, you go, whoa, where'd that come from? If there's certain things in the context you're in, there might also be old events in your life that never got healed properly. In other words, you didn't address them and that just takes you over. Or values that you cherish highly. And I'm sorry, but I can't, I'm just thinking of the soccer example when Zinedine way back when headbutted a guy in the final because he came over to him and made the Italian player made some comments about his mother, and his mother is high value. So he just lost it. So the techniques then are observe and then notice the emotion. I've had people in absolute rages who've said they're completely calm and not angry. It's like, whoa, you apparently can't you see yourself in a mirror. So it's one of those kinds of things where you have to observe and then do your best to go in and look at the vocabulary you have available to you to put a name to that emotions. It's a progressive thing. It's nothing about being perfect at all, because that would defeat the process of learning. So did I get that question, Tomasz? Did I miss anything on that question?
Hope so. I didn't create the questions. I read the question, so I hope the answer is correct. If not, then I accept. Oh, I get a thank you from Marta already. So I guess this is the right answer to the right question.
Okay, good, thanks. All right, thank you. So yeah, to finish, and thanks for bringing those forward. I appreciate that. That helps a lot. So in terms of shifting perspective, sometimes what helps is just being super transparent about what's going on. In other words, here's the worst fear, because the fears have a way of hiding. And I'll give you an example. It was an example of an Agile implementation in a company where traditional managers would never have put out the honesty around how many projects were stuck, what the backlog is, none of that stuff. They never would have put it out. But when somebody did put it out, when someone had the courage to do it, first of all, the traditional folks were going, whoa, career limiting move. And the people who actually put it forward said, no, this is how we get things done. This is how we all work together. And it shifted the dynamic in terms of the, inter-office dynamic completely. So that's not an example of shifting perspective, but it is an example of how putting things forward transparently does change the perspective, does change how the situation is perceived, along with the clarity and the quality of the strategic intent, which is at the highest level. The tool is zooming in and zooming out. If you're a big lover of detail, you've got from time to time, take a look at the bigger picture, zoom out. If you find that difficult, hang out with someone who really does it naturally. But that's where these two perspectives, with those two, way of doing it, which you can train yourself to do, obviously, then you allow yourself to have more different reviews to work with. Similarly, short-term and long-term. If we just look at this from the short term, what happens? If we look at it from the long term, does it change anything? That's another example of shifting perspective. So the core principle, this is all, again, a mastery level principle, is to tell the truth as you see it without blame or judgment. Lots of people tell the truth, but they speak with blame and judgment. It's not a perfect art form by any means, but work with that and things will improve over time. Your objectivity and detachment will improve. So the key thing, and this is from a neuroscience point of view, hence the brain thing, but the key thing is to focus on learning from everything that shows up. It's going to be uncomfortable. There'll be little bursts of, stretches into difficult territory, but, basically get some good night's sleep, wake up in the next morning, and that part of it will be integrated. So that's when all that integration takes place. So it's kind of focus on learning, but then defocus is sleeping. That's when it gets integrated. So that's that bit of a dance there. This is the program we've got coming up that I was telling you about that starts October 14th. No, October 12th. Pardon me. Anyway, 3 episodes. The first one's going to be shifting worldview. So that's shifting perspective at the bigger scale. The part 2 is how you function in unpredictable. And so what are the tool sets you use? And the third one is how do we co-create using COVID conditions or any other conditions where we obviously don't have the rules to play by. So that's off of that website out of Italy. So it's all in European time. Yeah, reach out, please. The podcast is on Spotify. It's on Apple. The current one, this one's been running for about 4 years, and I'm not publishing as regularly on it as I was, but there's still some really good stuff on there. I just, before we got started, I shared one with a Polish entrepreneur, great story about Nigeria and and what happens when you're running a startup and 2 of your business partners don't play by civil rules. And so that's what that story is about. So you'll find that on the Inspirational Insights podcast. Finally, and then we'll go to questions. One of the things that happens in living in complex adaptive systems, which our planet is, which organizations are, is that they change the planet, the nature's way of innovating. It's all nonlinear. So you've got to take in concept principles. You're shifting your decision making. Uses crisis or disruption. That's the pattern breaker, pattern interrupt. Breaks things up so we can work with things differently. It's rapid and radical. So it's not one of those mild tests of, gee, if we just tweak it here, we'll get an incremental change. And the story that came out of the UK was we have accomplished in 5 months what we would never have done in 7 years. So humans are quite capable of making rapid and radical changes. It always helps to have a crisis, but it's not necessary. And everything is interconnected. So I'm continuing to work on a series of articles on that. But that's absolutely interrelationships, interconnectivity, and it always shifts to a higher order. So that's unless we choose otherwise. So nature always shifts to a higher order. Humans are still we're still not sure about that. So yeah, there we go. Let's chat about what you see, what you have, what you're interested in, please.
All right, thank you very much. We have just a few minutes left, and I'm looking. I don't see much question now coming in. So I have my question, and really interesting about this one. What you think? I have my version of the answer, but I want to hear your version of the answer. You mentioned that this is something you can use for the private life or changing the organization. Now, my question is which is harder from your perspective?
Private life.
That would be my answer. And the second question is why?
Because in your private world, there's expectations that drive your behavior. There's expectations that you try to meet, and it's really being aware of what's coming at you. Plus, there's an emotional attachment to it. It's a lot easier to detach yourself in an organizational setting, but when you're inside, when you're in your family and you've got key relationships that you don't want to, I think that emotional overlay is a really critical one.
Yeah, my guess would be here also that it's easier to see something in other people than in just myself.
It certainly is. Yeah.
All right, so we're almost run out of time. So the very last question is how people can get into your presentation. So how can they get the slides and, you know, reach out to you?
Well, what's the conference doing on that? That's a good question.
Whatever you send them, we can share. So
yeah, so I've sent them my deck, so that can be shared, and I hopefully have recorded this, maybe.
I hope so.
Yeah, but reach out to me on LinkedIn, please. That's probably the easiest. It's DAWNAH Jones is the end of the LinkedIn. Please reach out to me on LinkedIn, and then we can pick up the conversation from there and take it from there. And then, of course, there's that's the main thing. Twitter is EPDAWNA _Jones. So reach out there as well if that's easier. Thanks, Tomasz.
Thank you very
Anything
much
else?
once again. Yeah, that's a lovely conversation. And running out of time, so I'm going to move us forward. So thanks once again for this talk.